I'm going to read one passage, and I'm going to ask Rachel if she will come up here. I want to read this passage in Mark chapter 4. And then there's an older song. There will be many of you that are familiar with it, and there will be some of you that are not familiar with it at all. But we want to share it with you. But first I want to read this passage that goes along with what we're seeing. In Mark chapter 4, in verse 1, it says, "Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. It says he taught many things by parable, and in his teaching said," and then it goes on with what Jesus began to teach. It's interesting as you go on over in the chapter, if you look in at verse 35, it says that day when evening came. So Jesus was out there in the boat for a long time teaching. I mean, the people on the shore and Jesus was in a situation they could probably all see him then. He was out there in the boat and he was teaching them and they were listening. But when the evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. Furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey." If you would have looked in the King James Version or the New King James Version, or I believe the English Standard Version, the word there would have been "peace, be still." And so we want to share with you this song this morning. Well, I have a capo somewhere. There it is. Sorry about that. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is overshadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep? The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm or sea, or demons or men, or whatever it be, the waters can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and sky. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, be still. Master, with anguish of spirit, I bow in my grief today. The depths of my sad heart are troubled. Oh, win and save, I pray. Torrents of sin and of anguish linger. When each perish, dear Master, oh, hasten and take control. The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and sky. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace be still, peace be still. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, peace, be still. Master, the terror is over, the elements sweetly rest. Earth's sun in the calm lake is mirrored, and heaven's within my breast. Linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more. And with joy I shall make the blessed harbor, and rest on that blissful shore. The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons, or men, or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and sky. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace be still, peace be still. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, peace, be still. If you noticed within the song, it went from the point that it was a recognition of Jesus out there in that boat, and they were afraid. Now it's interesting because they woke Jesus up. He was asleep. He'd been teaching all day. He was asleep. There was a cushion down there, and he was asleep on it, and the wind and the waves were there. And I don't know if you've ever been out in a boat when the wind and the waves, I mean, it gets kind of scary. I had an opportunity in Guyana, America, and I say opportunity because it really gave me a lot of praise and thanksgiving to God to be basically out into the ocean, out from the mouth of the river, in a 21-foot, as they call them, wooden speedboat, where the waves were, there were two boats, and we were one, and some guys in another, and the waves were high. You can see the other boat most of the time, and it wasn't that far away. You couldn't see any land anywhere. And these guys knew what they were doing. They knew how to maneuver them, but it was a scary experience. And so they were afraid, and they woke Jesus up, and they said, "Don't you care if we drown?" And you think about asking Jesus that. Don't you care if we drown? But in the moment, they were just expressing their feelings to him. But you can tell. But they woke him up, and it's interesting because they were really shocked. It says they were terrified when they realized what he had done, that he had calmed the wind and the waves. So they said, "Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him?" So they were terrified. So it's hard to kind of get the idea that they were thinking, "Wake Jesus up and save us," because they were terrified when he did. That perhaps they were just waking him up so he would be awake when he died. I don't know. They woke him up and said, "Don't you care?" Jesus said, "Don't you have any faith?" And that's really, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Second verse of the song goes to the point that we have found ourselves in. The sin and the anguish because of the sin. The waves of life are beating upon us. We can't see the door. And we're afraid. Why is that? third verse of the song, the twins are past, things are quiet, I can see now. Don't ever leave me. I'll need you. Maybe there's some comparison for us in this. It's interesting. We see the things that Jesus is able to do, and we might be able to reason, that this particular miracle of Jesus saying, "Peace, be still," and it just gets calm. That we need to see that because of Jesus' power over the elements. We know that people were healed, and we know that there were all kinds of things. He could know what somebody was thinking, even about him or about somebody else, and he could speak to that. And we see all of these things happening. But in this particular case, and we might be able to reason that's the only reason that's in here, so we see that he also had power over the elements. He truly is the creator. But I think it goes a little bit deeper than that, just like this song did, that we have times that we get afraid. We have times that we realize we have no control over this. And we start fearing that the worst is going to happen. We get afraid of what might happen, and we start worrying about it, and our mind gets wrapped up in that, and we are completely distracted with who is with us. In John chapter 14, we're going to look at several passages here. John chapter 14. Jesus makes a statement, and I think we need to take this to heart, even as another passage I'm going to say here in just a little bit. But in John chapter 14, it says in verse 25, "All this I have spoken while still with you, but the Counselor, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and remind you of everything I have said to you." And then he said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Jesus says, "Peace I give to you." I'm giving you peace, not the kind of peace that the world gives. You have any stock in that? The kind of peace the world gives? Doesn't last, does it? I mean, most of the time it's not even real peace. He gives us true peace. He says, "Don't let your hearts be troubled, and do not fear." So why do we? Why do we find ourselves so afraid sometimes? Why does our heart get so troubled? What would Jesus' response be when we're wringing our hands and even our prayers? I mean, this pleading of, "Please wake up. Please hear me. I'm in despair. I'm afraid." You ever have those prayers? They did too. He was sleeping in the boat, and they talked to Jesus. They said, "Don't you care if we drown?" What was his response? "Do you still have no faith?" That is response to us? Was that his response to them when they were afraid? Jesus, and it's interesting, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Does that sound a little harsh to you? A little bit? If you were praying and you were afraid of what's happening in your life and you're trying to deal with it and you're praying, you could hear the voice of Jesus and he said, "Why are you afraid? Don't you have any faith?" Feel a little hurt? I would. I imagine they did. I mean, they were terrified after he did what he did, but they saw it. They were terrified because they saw the power in the person that they were with, that there was no limitation. But you know what? They learned from that kind of thing. Even the Apostle Paul, I'm sure, we know that man didn't teach Paul. Paul's what he got from Jesus himself. But he knew these stories. He knew the things that had happened. He knew who Jesus was, and he knew what he had done. You know, Paul was in a shipwreck situation where everybody else thought they were all going to die, except for Paul, because of his faith. These men grew in faith as well. So you may have had circumstances in which you were truly afraid, and you didn't know how to handle it, and you were pleading with Jesus, please hear me. Please wake up. Don't you care that I'm perishing here? Hopefully, you can look back at that now, and that faith has grown because you know He's brought you through it, regardless. And there was a purpose, evidently, here with this. But Jesus isn't going to sugarcoat things. He's going to be direct, as direct as He was with these men. You might say that the humanity of Jesus was coming out with it. You ever been woke out of a dead sleep? And you know what? If you're really sleepy, and the boat's doing this, man, you can sleep. It is really nice. Yeah, Charles, right? Yeah. You can get some rest. And Jesus was sleeping. It was storming around him. I mean, the wind was blowing, the boat was rocking, and Jesus wasn't waking up. It tells you he was in a deep sleep. If he was just dozed off for a minute, he probably would have woken up. But he was deeply asleep, and they woke him up. But he had something to say about it. It's not different than what we see in a few other passages. Even if we go into the Psalms, there's some things that are said. One was just a statement that is within the Psalm, which was a song, and David writing it, he says in Psalm 29, verse 11, the Lord gives strength to His people. The Lord blesses His people with peace. In Psalm 85, we just go over a few of those. Psalm 5, verses 7 through 9, it says, show us your unfailing love, O Lord, and grant us salvation. I will listen to what God, the Lord, will say. He promises peace to His people, His saints, but let them not return to folly. Surely salvation is near those who fear Him, that His glory may dwell in our land. And so, perhaps they were right to be terrified, because who Jesus was, and He was right there. But the Lord blesses His saints with peace. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 7, there's admonition to us. I mean, coming from the Old Testament now to the New. There's admonition to us to take into account. Philippians chapter 4. He says in verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. The peace of God that transcends all understanding. Do you understand His peace? This says you don't. You can feel His peace. You can know that He is here. You can know that He will always be with you. Lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the age or world, Jesus said. When we recognize His peace, we know it, but we don't understand the greatness of it. Can we understand how Jesus could speak to the wind and to the waves and say, quiet? And it is. We We were talking the other day, and Remington mentioned the first time he remembered camping. And we were out there in a tent. It was late at night, stars were shining, and it was late enough in the summer that you had the katydids and you had the cicadas and you had the crickets. And if you've been in a tent out in the middle of the woods, all of that is going on. It's loud. He was just a little guy. He said, "Mommy, can you turn them off?" He couldn't go to sleep. It was loud. That's one thing a mommy can't do, is turn the bugs off. You know, Jesus could. We don't really understand even those physical things that he could do and how he did them. Not really. Except for his creator, he made it. He can control it. But he can do the same thing because he created you too. And so he can give you that peace that goes beyond any understanding. He can give you that peace that you can't even fully explain to somebody why you're peaceful in a situation like that. How in the world can you be peaceful in a situation like that? The best that you can do is say, Jesus. In Colossians chapter 3, while we're over here close, in verse 15 it says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. The word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, as you sing psalms, hymns, spiritual songs of gratitude in your heart to God. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." We started that section out, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. He truly is able to give us peace, but there is instruction for us to do something with that and accept that peace. There's instruction to let that peace rule in our hearts. There's instruction not to let anxiety overcome us to the point that we're asking him, "Don't you care?" But if you're at that point right now, recognize that what he is desiring within you, just like he was desiring with those that were in the boat with him, was for them to have faith. That's what he pointed to. Why are you afraid? He doesn't want you to be afraid. Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And so we've got those things that we understand. That's what can give us the peace. As much as he could say, "Peace, be still." If you guys want to come up. Got one more passage. And you don't have to turn over there, but Psalm 46 and verse 10. And it's just the other part of this. We were looking at the peace part. And I realize most of your translations probably said hush or quiet, depending on the translation you had. But it's still the same idea. But not only did he say peace, but he said, "Be still." And the elements just obeyed. For them, I'm sure the silence was deafening. Can you imagine? You're out there and all that is happening, and just all of a sudden, boom. Smooth, quiet. Psalm 46 says, "Be still. Know that I am God." He's saying it to the wind. He's not saying it to the waves. He's saying it to you. Be still. And know that I'm God. If you don't have his peace, whether it is we need to pray with you, whether you need to just come down here and pray, whether you need to pray with everybody, or you need to be baptized into Christ to begin that life of peace with him, come as we stand and sing.